Hello everyone, Professor D here. This week we're going to talk about the first part of mental health. And in this week's lecture you will have several examples of mental health conditions that you'll want to be comfortable with basic definitions and descriptions thereof. But what I'd like to do today is remind ourselves about some of the connections that are based in mental health. So you will learn that a lot of it is about chemical imbalances in the brain, which some of that can be genetic, some of that can be diet related or a combination thereof. Additionally, as we spoke of in the stress unit, there are a lot of stressors throughout our lives that if we do not develop adequate coping mechanisms, those can combine with other chemical and physical stressors in our lives and potentially increase the likelihood of particular mental health conditions arising, particularly depression and anxiety. So I'd like to just remind ourselves that we have stress throughout our lives, and our body is designed to deal with stress as far as being able to get out of the way. If you suddenly see a car coming at you, you're able to respond in survival status that way, or in a positive manner as far as being able to put everything into an exam and then pass an exam, short-lived stressors. It's those stressors that are more chronic and long-lasting that tend to really create problems mentally and psychologically for individuals. Some of the examples that we've gave in the past were for teenagers, certainly peer pressure, their body image and how the media portrays that their body should be, comparing to others if they go through growth spurts and puberty at different times. There might be that stress there. Developing their own taste in music and appreciation of other things in life different from their parents, so there's sort of a stepping out from their parents. Developing other relationships, probably likely first romantic relationships and things of that sort, as well as learning to develop other relationships with adults such as teachers and principals and guidance counselors, clergy, etc. So there's a lot of balance that comes in teenage years, and there's a lot of hormones and chemical changes that are happening too. So certainly there's a lot changing in adolescence that sometimes, the further away we get from adolescence, we sort of forget what it's like. And so perhaps when we have teenagers, we might forget some of the things that are happening there. So it's always good to remind ourselves of that perspective. In the college years, there's managing budget, probably trying to work and study at the same time. And then certainly when you graduate, getting that first job with that new degree can always be challenging. And so there's some stressors in that respect. And then as adults, we always have the bills to balance, family life, changes in family dynamic, if there's marriages, divorces, new children, perhaps parents are passing, illnesses in the family, cancer, things of that sort can often be stressors as we're adults as well. And seniors, even if they're retired, a lot of times we think, oh, retirement is this happy time where you don't have to work and you can enjoy life, and that definitely is the case. But there can be, for many people, the concern that do they have enough money? Especially current seniors, they were promised a lot in regards to Medicare and Social Security, and it's not necessarily panning out for them. So they might not have a strong backup plan in regards to finances. So that could be a concern for them. Also, as we get into adulthood and become seniors, those that we grew up with in school and such, they might die. So we start to realize a sense of our own mortality. And some of you have already experienced that. You might have realized, I am a human being, I will die at some point. And some of you haven't gotten there yet. You haven't had that moment. So for those of us that are there, I had that in my late 20s when someone that I grew up with died at 29 suddenly. That was when I first realized that I was mortal and I wasn't going to be here forever. And that's sort of a scary concept, I think, to really grasp. And for those of you that haven't had that experience yet, you will at some point in your life. So just appreciate that. But try to, in the meantime, just really enjoy life and give everything that you can to life and enjoy things, and don't take things for granted, because Unfortunately, I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer right now, but unfortunately, life is precious, and we really want to make the best of it. And sometimes we do feel that something is weighing on us so much, but it might not, in the long term, be as consequential as we think it's going to be. So we just want to really put things into perspective, and we'll talk about that in part 2 as well. Another item that I really want to talk about is survivor's remorse or survivor's guilt. And what happens here is it's classically discussed in major catastrophic events, terrorist attacks, plane crashes and things like that, train accidents, where people survive and others don't. And they have a lot of guilt about why me, if I had chosen that seat, or if I drove instead of that individual, or vice versa, maybe things would have been different. And there can be a lot of guilt in individuals in that respect. And it doesn't always have to be a major event. It could also be feeling guilty if someone you love or care about dies of cancer. Why me? Why them? No, why not me? So on and so forth. And also, I've spoken to some people who are survivors of cancer, and when they go for the treatments, they often are put in a room with others on the same day every week that are receiving similar treatments, and they can have sort of this bonding experience. And I know someone who, she was bonding with this person, and one week she went for her treatment, and that individual wasn't there, and she found out from the nurse she had died. And it really hit her hard because she had a lot of guilt behind that. She felt that she was going through it with her, and yet she was able to survive and the other individual wasn't. So there can be survivor's guilt and survivor's remorse on many different levels. So I just want us to appreciate that as an aspect for individuals in their emotional state. Suicide is definitely something that we really need to talk about, and sometimes in our society we don't like to discuss that. But there are people who, they get to a point with a combination of mental illness and or stressors, etc. They don't feel there's any way to go back. They're at a dead end in their mindset, and they can attempt harm on themselves. Sometimes this is preceded by self-harm, such as cutting or burning themselves, or making statements, but not always. And if we do suspect that, we want to do the best we can to say something and maybe help them find a hotline or someone or a professional they can speak with. And if you yourself are ever experiencing or currently experiencing thoughts of hurting yourself, please seek out some help and some guidance. You're not alone. Many people experience this, and there are lots of ways to seek out some help and get some guidance in that, and there are professionals that will assist you in that. I would like to talk about another aspect that we often like to sort of not discuss is failed suicide attempts. And we want to realize that there is a substantial number of individuals that do attempt suicide and they're not successful. So some of the consequences can be that, depending on their attempt method, they can have injured themselves, they might have limitations in their activities of daily living going forward, so on and so forth. Another one I'd like to talk about is, depending on their chosen method, they might leave behind consequences of other individuals. Not only now that maybe their friends and family have to deal with the fact that this person attempted suicide, but others in the society as well. And an example that I gave in the lecture, and I'd like to talk about because it really stands out for me as a very strong example of the consequences of failed suicide, is that someone locally a few years ago, he was in his 50s, and he decided he wanted to end his life. So he took his pickup truck out on Interstate 89, and approximately, I think around 89, 90 miles per hour, he decided to cross into oncoming traffic and cross through the median. In so doing, if you're familiar at all with New Hampshire and Vermont interstates, there's usually hills and granite and things like that. Well, he wasn't anywhere near the granite, but he went down and up, and he became airborne, and he landed on top of an SUV, immediately killing the male and female passengers who were in their 20s, and the female was pregnant at the time. So that immediately came out in the papers and the press that in his failed suicide attempt, he killed a family. It named him, it named his wife, it named his son, who was at college locally at the time, and they were immediately thrown into to a press frenzy, and he wound up pleading guilty. He did take responsibility for that, so he's now incarcerated, and certainly there's public and likely financial situations involved in that as well. But ultimately, 3 people's lives were ended because of his failed suicide attempt, and now he's also living with that guilt, likely. So I just like us to appreciate some of the items that we don't always like to talk about, especially with mental health in our society. Sometimes it's stigmatized that, oh, we don't talk about that, and I want us to just push that aside right now and realize this is a very serious issue, and that it's important to talk about it, and that we should feel confident in being able to do so and reach out for help, and that there's no shame in saying that we need some help navigating our thoughts, because there's a lot of thoughts out there, and we want to make sure that we're able to process them and cope with the stresses of life appropriately. I hope you found this video helpful, and I look forward to seeing you later in the week.